And you won't have this problem, but I did. The handshakes, don't worry about it. And yeah. That's fine. Ryan's brother Joel will speak first. He prepared something. Yesterday he said he wasn't going to speak. Today he's going to speak. So that'll be before Bill Gardner, who comes in on Zoom.
Okay, so Bill Gardner's on Zoom. Okay.
And Bill Gardner's on Zoom. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We're not normally at church at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, are we? Welcome to the First Unitarian Congregation of Ottawa. I'm the Reverend Derek Meter, the lead minister here, and it is my pleasure to welcome each and every one of you here today. We, those who gather in this worship hall or are watching from afar, wherever they may be, gather this morning to remember and to celebrate the life of Reverend Brian Shepherd Kopke, who died at the very end of last year. We begin by acknowledging that our campus is located on traditional, unsurrendered, and unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, and that the work of reconciliation is a responsibility of our congregation and of all Canadians. Come into this circle of loss. Come into this circle of compassion. Come unto this circle of memory. Come into this circle of love. We gather this morning to mourn, remember, and honor who Brian Kopke was. He is no longer with us in the spirit, physically, but his spirit dwells on in our mind and in our hearts in the way he helped give shape to our very lives. Brian was to us a father, a husband, a brother, an uncle, a friend, pastor, colleague, a fierce proponent of justice, and sometimes, just sometimes, someone we wished would cool it just a little bit. After our time together in this space, Brian's family has arranged a reception for us in Fellowship Hall just out the doors to your right. There we'll continue to share the stories of who Brian was to us and enjoy one another's good company. Some of his amazing creations are on display for you there. You'll enjoy them, I'm sure. Brian led this congregation for nearly a generation, so it is fitting that as we gather this morning, we do so as this congregation begins each time it gathers by lighting a chalice flame. Doing so reminds us of this community's mission to kindle the light within and inspire courage to nurture the web of life and to help create a just and compassionate world. Eleanor and Eamonn, will you now light our chalice? Eleanor and Eamonn are Brian's grandchildren, and he loved them fiercely. Thank you. This simple act symbolizes our hope that light may shine upon us as we seek to live with lives that are as meaningful as possible. May it help us today to see both honestly and, to see both honesty and love throughout this morning celebration of Brian's life. Music, please. And now Elizabeth and Sam will grace us for the first of two times today. Piano and flute.
Thank you both. Brian Kopke served this congregation from 1985 through 2007, making him the longest-serving religious leader in the history of this faith community. Not a day goes by when I'm not aware that his influence lingers still, and that's generally a very good thing. Still, Brian had a rich life beyond his time here and behind this pulpit. We are here to honor all of who he was today. Brian was born on March 6, 1945 in Newton, Massachusetts, to Blanche and Walter Kopke Jr. He was the second oldest of their 4 boys and 1 girl. After the family moved from Newton, the family had a farm west of Duxbury, a farm south of Boston. One night when he was 10 years old or so, Brian stayed up into the early hours building a radio antenna. When he plugged it into the wall to test it, everything shorted out. And his family was awoken rudely in the early hours, the midnight hours, prompting his father to yell out, "Brian, just go to sleep, gosh darn it," or words to that effect. Brian attended Duxbury High School and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Geology from Colby College in Maine in 1964. After college, Brian tried his hand at teaching, but found it just a bit too constraining for his soul. Having been raised a Unitarian Universalist and having served as president of his alma mater's Interfaith Association, and perhaps owing at least in part to his middle name, Shepherd, his interest gravitated to perhaps the last generalist profession, parish ministry. Brian graduated from Harvard Divinity School in 1970 and served congregations in Duxbury, Massachusetts, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Southold, getting real trouble there, Southold on New York's Long Island, before heading here to Ottawa, as I said, in 1985. In Duxbury, Brian and his first wife, Joanna, here today, married. In the 13 years the two were together, they gave birth to Ben and Sara, who rounded out their family. Shortly after arriving in Ottawa, Maggie and Brian met. Now, some of you know her as Maggie. She's asked me to call her, well, it really doesn't matter. Maggie, you know who you are, we know who you are. Shortly after arriving here, the two of them met, Brian and Maggie. They were married 3 years later here in this room, and in time, the two gave birth to their son, Sam. When I asked his family what Brian was most proud of in his life, the first response was immediate. His grandchildren, Eleanor and Eamonn, who you met a moment ago. And then there was a bit of a pause. You could say that Brian was proud of his family, the work he did in this congregation and the others that he served. Here that work included ensuring that Samsumia and Sri Kumar Rai had safe sanctuary within these walls, while helping convince the Canadian government that it was both the right thing to do and would also be less of a hassle in the long run to simply open the nation's doors to those two fine men. But Brian took pride in everything he did, everything that he was a part of. Was there a particular justice issue that really got him riled up? Well, no, unless it was inequity itself. Across the board, equality was the foundation of Brian's justice work. And if you knew Brian, you knew he was as curious a person as they come. From what I can tell, his interests didn't know any bounds. And that's not something I think I've said about anyone before. To him, this thing we know as life was to be savored, celebrated, mined, shared, protected, you name it. And I wonder if he saw boredom as being much of a sin, as evil. And yes, I know those are traditional theological terms, Christian theological terms, to which Brian would have quickly and expertly unpacked. Brian was, and this will in no way be an exhaustive list, a preacher, a teacher, a prophet, an artist and woodworker, a photographer, a storyteller, a flute player and maker, a hiker, a runner, a world traveler. You can keep coming up. The list would be exceptionally long. Early in my time with this congregation, I was given a tour of Unitarian House just next door, and as we passed a display of his artwork, my eyes pulled me towards Brian's drawings of barns before I noticed that they were by him, the previous minister here. His drawings are simply meticulous. What a gift of attention he had. What a steady hand. As I've been told, each week before the start of worship, Brian would sit by himself in the third row from the back of this room, starting about 40 minutes prior to the start of worship. And there he did not want to be disturbed. He was running through what he needed to say that morning. I've read some of his sermons. Brian was an excellent preacher. His sermons were as demanding as they were impassioned, crying out against war, injustice, and the idolatries of consumerism. As a minister here, Brian taught classes on both Jesus and St. Paul, and with Alex Campbell began this congregation Worship Associates program, which I could not function without, let me just say. Brian was also one of several local faith leaders who contributed regularly to the religion section of the Ottawa Citizen newspaper, when papers used to carry such sections. Brian was among those who graced those pages the well-spoken outlier. It was terrific outreach to this congregation. In 1990, after he had been here 5 years, less than a year after the Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu had been deposed, and that nation, Romania, was just beginning to open to the West, Brian spent 6 weeks of sabbatical time in Romania. And when I was in Bucharest, Romania's capital city, in August of 2001, 21 years later, bullet holes on stone buildings could be still seen throughout the city. Back closer to home, when it was time for Brian to retire, the community here wanted to honor all the effort he had given to the creation of our memorial gardens outside. Renee DeVry was one of those key people behind the creation of Brian's Rest, a small gazebo out there under the trees. And here's what she had to say about the goal for those gardens. Some wanted the gardens for quiet, solitary contemplation with nature, whereas Brian wanted community and groups in the gardens. Opposite goals. But because of all of his support and hard work, Brian's Rest was given out of love as a compromise. After learning of Brian's death, I reached out to our colleagues and asked them who he was to them. Here are some of the responses they sent in. From Francis Deverell: I first met Brian at one of my earliest ministers' retreats. Canadian Unitarian ministries are stretched out right across the country and often in quite isolated regions. Brian challenged all of us to really get to know each other, to discuss what's really going on, and develop with your colleagues a true and deep and lasting support system. She continues, Brian was a very busy guy. Among other things, he was an artist and a prospector. He was looking for the day he would strike diamonds. He loved geology and hiking and nature. He lived life intensely and with passion. I remember his campaign of simple living, where he encouraged our congregation to move beyond consumerism and get rid of folks' excess stuff. Brian was a man of strong opinions, and he knew what way he wanted to go. He had a vision for the place of Unitarianism in the religious landscape of Canada and the U.S. as well. She concludes, I both admired him, feared him, and loved him. From Wendy Luella Perkins, what I remember most about Brian is our many times at our annual retreats. Brian was so often the instigator of a grand adventure somewhere at or near the site we were meeting. Yes, he had a keen mind and sometimes could be prickly and opinionated, but I also found that he brought a sense of playfulness and spontaneity, and a lot of care beneath his oft blustery exterior that I really appreciated. We'll hear a little later in our time together this morning from another longtime and dear friend and colleague of Brian's, Bill Gardner. And this next remembrance is from Tom Owen Toll, a colleague and friend from sunny San Diego, California. First, Brian was a man of immense depth and expansiveness, one who balanced beautifully the strength of both his right and left brains. He blended rational and engineering skills alongside artistic and emotional ones, and both came into play during his journey, whether he was analyzing rock formations, leading Jesus seminars, or playing in the park with his or our grandchildren. Let me skip forward just a little bit. Tom and his wife, Carolyn Owen Toll, were co-ministers together for years, decades in San Diego. Tom says, there are friends in his and Carolyn's 50 years of marriage who are closer to one or the other, my wife or I. That's understandable in the way it usually happens. Not so with Brian. He could spend special time with each of us, and we'd all three be the better for it. There was simply no one like Brian Kopke in either of our lives. There won't ever be. Although we were both older than Brian, he died first. The only plus with that sad fate is that we get to share these reminiscences of our exceptional friend, and we'll miss his of us. We carry forth joyful sparks of his character and conduct in our own final lapse. And Tom's wife, Reverend Carolyn Owen Toll. Brian Kopke was one of our dearest friends. While we knew him during our ministries, we became deeper friends after we three retired. And he would come to California and visit the deserts and climb the mountains. Following his quiet time, hiking, filling his spirit, and collecting some beautiful stones that he would bring as gifts to place in our garden, we would enjoy several meaningful days of friendship, long conversations, and walks through the neighborhood. We love him more than mere words can tell, she concludes, and we were so grateful that he was an important part of our lives. It is deeply sad to lose him. Carolyn was, if I remember correctly, the first woman to run for president of our Unitarian Universalist Association. Sadly, her own lap ended just a couple days ago with her death. Tom, we know you're watching this morning. Our love to you. Early in the month, October 2nd, Carol and Tom and I talked about Brian over Zoom. Before the conversation could come to a close, there had to be show and tell. They just had to show me the wooden toys that Brian had carved as presents for their two grandchildren. Tom and Carolyn's pride and delight were infectious. For myself, early in my time here with this congregation, I reached out to Brian. His wife, Maggie, answered the phone. While I knew that Brian was having memory problems, I hadn't known how bad his condition had become. In 2016, Brian had begun showing signs of memory loss. As both her parents suffered the effects of dementia, Maggie knew what might and did occur over the months to come. The couple had plans and hopes for more travel than they were able to make possible. And as Maggie put it to me, dementia stole Brian's life right out from under him, but he still smiled. Let's remember Brian that way, always full of the goodness of life and never letting a moment go to waste. And with that said, our choir has a piece for all of us. Thank you, choir. Jen introduced that song to the congregation just a few weeks ago. I am sure Brian would have loved it. And now some of those who knew Brian the longest will speak. And in addition to the names in your program, we will begin with Brian's brother Joel, and then Bill Gardner hopefully will be able to join us from New England. Joel?
Well, I'll do my best after a couple deep breaths. And good morning, everybody. My name is Joel, and my brother was Brian. And I first knew him when I was 2 years old, when I could talk, as By Me. Yeah, By Me. So every once in a while I would call him By Me, and he would smile. He was the second oldest of 4 boys and 1 girl. And he was the sibling that I felt closest to, both as a teenager growing up and as a young adult. In high school, my girlfriend and I would often visit Brian and Joanna on a Friday or Saturday night and watch the Bruins play hockey. We had a great time doing that. It was a fun time, and Brian's sense of humor and his odd thought process, I guess you know about that, made for some very interesting discussions. Later in life, when I had grown up, I moved to Philadelphia, where Brian and Joanna had lived. I found myself living with them for several months while I settled into a new town. I began college life, and I found a full-time job. He was someone I could always go to and not only get good advice, but he had a compassionate voice that made good sense to me. A little bit about our younger growing up days now. When we were young, we lived in West Duxbury, Massachusetts. Our dad owned a small farm. 2 of my brothers were involved in 4-H along with me. Brian was one of them. We owned Black Angus steers, Seltdown sheep, and we had a few chickens. Little farm. There were 2 hay fields where we captured several hundred bales of hay each fall. And that was fun, loading the bales of hay on the trailer, and the car would bring it back, and the trailer would rock like this, and we had the top of the trailers here, but we had the bales way up here. Sometimes they'd fall, and we'd fall with them. That was okay. That was part of the fun. Let's see here. We had a very large cornfield, very large. I'd say that was about an acre, and that was good for feeding 4 boys at one time, and later a girl. And we used to cut the stalks and feed the stalks to the Angus beef, make them big and strong and fat so they could feed us later. Several times during the summer, our dad would put out traps near the chicken pen because we'd have little visitors who would come in and eat the eggs or attack the chickens. And that would undoubtedly lead to the next morning smelling like dead skunk. And you know what that is? That's, you wake up and go, "Oh, Dad, what did you do?" Okay, we lived in an old farmhouse. It was very old. It's one of the oldest dwellings in Duxbury, if you will, where it wasn't unusual for Brian during the summer to wake up screaming and yelling. Now, he never told you this story, did he? Screaming and yelling as a teenager because a bat had gotten into his room and was flying around at night. It was great. I never laughed so hard. I'm on the floor underneath him. He was on the third floor. So that's the way it works. I tell you this so that you understand that those were simpler times for all of us. Sorry. Brian was the academic leader in the family. Always getting really good grades. And he also created just wonderful science projects going through high school. Just some things I even amaze at those right now. There was one time on a Saturday that he was working in the back of our garage, and he lit the place on fire. Yeah, that's your minister. Okay? He never told you about that. But that's okay, because we got the fire out quickly, and my father said, no more chemistry projects in the back of the garage. Forget that. You're done. In high school, he participated in cross country, and as far as I know, he always finished first in that 2.5-mile run, always. He was a class president, an A student, and an athlete. During the past 25 or more years, maybe even 30 or 35 years, I didn't spend as much time with him as I had previously, obviously, because he had moved to Canada and I'm 7.5, 8 miles south of here. But I thank Margie and Sam for taking care of him. I urge each of you to keep in touch, in person if possible, with those that you care about. Take time to plan the trips, no matter where they are. Those visits will provide you with memories that otherwise you'll never have and you might regret. He was a great dad, brother, grandfather to 3 young adults and to 2 beautiful. And to 2 beautiful grandchildren. He was really somebody that I looked up to in college life and in general. I can't even get the papers separated. Oh, goodness. Okay. I'm so glad that I was with him at the end. I told him several stories, how much he meant to me growing up, how much I loved him. And that I would always be grateful that he was my brother. Keep those that are close to you in your thoughts and prayers. Let them know how much you mean to them. We have today, and tomorrow's not guaranteed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel. Bill, are you out there?
I'm here. No?
Terrific. We're looking forward to hearing from you, and I got to go on.
So, I'm Reverend Bill Gardner. I really appreciate this opportunity to share my memories of my beloved colleague and friend, Brian Kopke. What does it mean to be a special ministerial colleague? A good ministerial colleague Joel shared about him being on the cross-country team. He would finish long before me, and by the time I finished my run, he would be all stretched out and enjoying a cup of coffee. But then we'd hang out together and share some good stories. One of the things that we were very eager to do is to develop our speaking skills. And the two of us, over a 3-year period, journeyed all over the country, working with some of the leading teachers of preaching. Hopefully that improved our speaking skills, but the time that we spent together on the road certainly did a lot to enhance and deepen our personal relationship. He moved to Ottawa in '85, I to Boston in 1990, but we continued to meet in the Greenfield Study Group, which is a minister's group that's met for many decades. He was actually the scribe of the group and one of the anchor key people in providing leadership for it. Well, the Greenfield group had a practice of meeting in the morning, and then from noontime until 3, we would take a break and have lunch, and then reconvene at 3 o'clock. And on one particular day, Brian said, "Bill, we've got to go climb Mount Monadnock." I said, "Brian, that's a ridiculous idea. There's no way we can get up that mountain and down by 3 o'clock. Oh, we can do it, we can do it." So off we went, riding like maniacs across the mountain, going up the hill as fast as we could. Getting up the top of the hill, I think we may have looked out for a minute out into the valley, and then we knew we were going to be late. But we proceeded down the hill. Now this, of course, was ridiculous. We're running down the hill, which is an extremely dangerous thing to do. We finally get down the bottom of the hill, and we speed back to the meeting. We're 1/2 hour late. And we're walking into a group of angry colleagues. What is wrong with the people? What were you thinking? And they kept putting that on us for years after that incident. But that was Brian and Bill trying to make something different happen. I remember Brian as being energetic, creative, and fun. And he liked to shake things up and do things differently, didn't he? He was passionate about ministry and the challenges and opportunities of serving the congregation in Ottawa. In his ministry, he was committed to justice making, work for diversity and inclusion in our community and in our nations. When I think about my relationship with Brian, I feel great joy. And today, that joy is infused with deep grief about his passing. I'll finish at that point.
Thank you, Bill. Blessings to you. And now let's return a little closer to home. Jackie, John?
Good morning. I'm John Rutherford. Don Saxon and Renee Saxon, parents of Margie, were great friends, and we kept in contact with the Kopkes for all these years. My clearest memory is of a man with a smile and charm. He was a kind man and a great friend. He was a courageous leader, as demonstrated by his role in encouraging the congregation to provide sanctuary for 2 men who were out of grace from their home governments, Samsu Mia and separately Shri Ray. Both of these good people and their families could well have been deported from Canada without Brian's gathering support in the congregation for the massive duties involved in providing sanctuary. One of the duties is that we had a person here 24 hours a day, as I recall, whose job it was, if the immigration people arrived looking angry, they were to phone the local media and bring them to our rescue. And this was just part of the load of keeping sanctuary. Another incident stands out for me. Brian was the minister for the wedding of me and my wife, Jacqueline Holzman. I had a little card to guide me in saying my promises. I started out boldly and loudly saying, I, Jackie Holzman, do promise to love and obey. As this morning, everybody started laughing. But the gentleness of Brian came through. He said, John, let us try that again. And so far, the wedding has held up for more than 35 years. Brian was an excellent teacher, as evidenced by his theology courses on Jesus and Paul, as remembered by Alex Campbell. But I also remember that he led a program, Making Your Own Theology, and this helped me define my outlook for life and death, I guess. In 1994, Brian, as the minister of the congregation, put a formal proposal to the board proposing the establishment of a new congregations committee, looking forward to establishing a branch of the Unitarian Fellowship out in the east end of the city. And Fred Cappuccino was asked to lead the East End Committee, and the result has been the creation of the East End congregation of the church. After retiring from being minister in the First Unitarian, Brian was never more seen here. I never saw him again after he retired from the ministry. But he did this because he was very conscious of being a shadow on the incumbent minister. The new guy has a challenge to replace a big set of shoes, and he was not going to interfere. He was a fine man. Last time I spoke to Brian was on a golf course. He was coming down a fairway as I was going up an adjoining fairway. We met in the rough, which was not an unusual phenomenon for me and him. But his enthusiasm for our meeting was clear, and we promised to play together one time soon. But I don't think we ever did play again. Brian was a good, kind, and gentle man with much enthusiasm for whatever it was he was doing. He has been missed for a long time and will be remembered much longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marnie, for inviting us to say a few words. We go back a long time, mainly with your parents as well. You know, we heard that Brian liked to climb mountains and he liked rocks. I wonder what he would think about Mount Cleary, that graces our border over here. So when you look at when Brian joined the congregation, to lead the congregation, 1985, the Unitarian House had opened in 1984. So he really was our closest minister right from day one. And so I have a few comments that I read that Agnes Fennell, who was our first executive director, had to say. Because Brian touched many, many lives, thousands of lives, and you heard he not only married John and me, but also my daughter Ellen and her husband Jamie. But here at Unitarian House, the gardens were very important, as they still are. They were the responsibility of two sisters who were living in Unitarian House. And I'm reading from the publication that came out a few years after we opened. Edwina Scott and Vivian Ward were the ones that led the gardens. They had complained when some of the landscapers cut off the heads of the flowers and were allowed to choose the next landscapers. And since some of the residents were getting older and had difficulty bending over, it was suggested that some sort of raised gardens boxes should be installed. With the help of students at Highland Park School, the boxes that are now there in the courtyard were built and installed on a bleak November day, and Agnes relates, "They didn't look great, and it was hard to believe that in spring they would be alive with flowers." Dr. Slazak, a former plastic surgeon from the West who had come in begrudgingly because his children lived in Ottawa, he had strong opinions on many subjects, and he stormed into Agnes's office saying, "Well, lady, you have done it now. I have a lot of respect for you, but I can't believe that you authorized having those boxes put in the courtyard. They look like coffins. I'd probably be one of the first to be buried there." And at that point, Brian came in, and he saved the day saying, "Oh, Agnes, what a wonderful idea. This is marvelous. I can just envision come spring, residents out there planting, putting in their bulbs, putting in their tomatoes, and it's going to be just wonderful." And he was right, but many of the residents still agreed with Dr. Slazak. Then another memory. We were around for many years. We're still there. It's almost 40 years, and Brian was with us most of those years. But right at the beginning, Brian helped make Unitarian House special. He and Liz Benjamin would come to lunch, and our residents were always made aware of events like concerts that happened here, and there's another one happening Saturday night. There were sad times, of course, and once there were many deaths and transfers in a short period. It was a terrible time between November and March of that year. It was gray, it was black. So Agnes asked Brian if he could have a special service for staff and residents to help them through the grieving process. This he did, and it was a meaningful experience. The residents certainly thanked him, as did the staff, and it brought everyone together. They needed to share their feelings and emotions, and Brian gave everyone an opportunity to speak. Many people did. And they talked about some of the residents who had died and how sad they felt, and how Brian was helping them. And this is something that was written about 10 years after we opened. Brian's memory still exists. As you know, we have these wonderful sketches that he did of barns on our wall, and we have Brian's rest out in the gardens. Brian was a very warm and caring person. He left a good name. What else could anybody else expect but to leave a good name, to be good in our memories? In Yiddish, we say he was a mensch. Brian was a mensch. Thank you for asking to say a few words.
Thank you for coming. My dad spent 7 years as minister to the First Unitarian Church, Philadelphia. There was a period of time there where Martin, a homeless man, would come and sit in the back. He would keep to himself, but he would always stay for the reception afterwards, as there was food and coffee available to everybody. One day, one winter Sunday, Dad approached Martin and asked him about his shoes, which were non-existent. Martin wore sandals, no matter the weather, as he couldn't find shoes that fit his feet. With pencil and paper, Dad traced Martin's feet. The trace was sent along to my grandfather, Ed, who worked in the shoe industry. Ed sent back beautiful leather dress shoes and a few pairs of socks. Martin loved his new shoes. As he tried them on, remarking at how wonderful they were, he asked, "Do they come in black?" Flash forward a few years, and a man came to the Sunday service. He was handsome and wearing a suit. After the service, he approached Dad and asked, "I used to come here, didn't I?" It was Martin, back on medication and no longer homeless. He went on to say, "I don't remember a lot from that time, but I know I came here because I liked the music and everybody was nice to me." My dad's life is a story of care, the care he took in fine details of his barn illustrations, the care he put into every Sunday sermon, the decades of care he invested in developing his watercolors. and the care he took in selecting the wood and the grain in each of his beautiful wooden toys. He cared more about rocks than anyone I've ever known, often carrying a small boulder found on a desert hike to give to a friend or family member for their garden. More so is it caring for people, all people. Dad first presided over commitment ceremonies in the 1970s and wept when same-sex marriages were finally legalized in the United States. From his first days as a minister, Dad was a voice for the marginalized. He once wrote in the Ottawa Citizen, "We are each part of an interconnected web in this world. Unitarians do not believe in tearing the web apart, but in strengthening its tethers, its warp and woof." When Dad passed last New Year's Eve, there were 7 of us gathered at his side. I think if he had it to choose, he would have left us on April Fool's Day, but we all agreed that he would have appreciated the timing of New Year's. It was the end of one year and the beginning of this new phase in our lives. I'd say it's a phase without Brian Kopke, but we're never really without Brian Kopke. I know for me it's a daily struggle to not repeat his dad jokes. In our family, a sneeze elicits a Gesundheit, which is the German good health, which was of course delivered by my dad as, not as Gesundheit, but gesund loose. He just couldn't help himself. Dad surrounds us in our home, as I know he does for Sara and Ben, Margie, Sam, and others. His watercolors and pen drawings line our walls. Rocks that he's collected from the desert are arranged in our yards. Collections he's helped foster rest on our shelves. In a way, they're all representative of Dad's diversity of thought, his mind that never stops, even to sleep, and the care that he put into anything he took on. Above all, Dad cared for his family. In Los Angeles, the jacaranda trees lose their flowers each spring, carpeting sidewalks in purple. Dad would walk with Eleanor and Eamonn, both toddlers at the time, taking great care in collecting the flowers. I think of Dad the most when I see these flowers. Those moments with Dad as his most perfect self, his inner child on display, his patience and desire to impart knowledge fully engaged. On behalf of all of our family, thank you for being here, and take care.
Hi, I'm Sara. I first have just a little bit that the daughter of some good friends of Dad sent to me a couple weeks ago to read. It's from Melanie Essex, who's the daughter of Nancy and John Wisman, really long-term artist friends of Dad who really, I guess, encouraged and really helped him with his watercolors and art in Maine. And we recently visited Nancy, and it was just such a pleasure to see both of them again. But this is from Melanie, their daughter, who is part of a youth group that Dad started in Southold, New York, at one of his first churches. So in Melanie's words, "I met Brian when he was just 28 and newly installed as the minister of the UU Church in Southold, New York. He was introduced to me by my friend Allison, who told me he was starting a youth group at the church. Being a typically skeptical 13 to 14-year-old, I was not terribly enthusiastic, but went along out of curiosity and fear of missing out before that was a thing. We met at my friend's house. Here was this young man with a huge beard and not dressed in clothes that screamed minister. The things he proposed the group might do: camping trips, biking, hikes, exploring New York City, role-playing, what was that? And the chance to hang out with a very youthful adult who was definitely not a parent or a teacher were immediately interesting. I'm pretty sure I signed up right on the spot. In the turbulent years that followed through high school and adolescence, Brian was there as a mentor, sounding board, moral compass, and occasionally a ringleader. It's hard to say to whom his presence was more invaluable, whether to the teenagers in his charge or to our parents, helping us navigate challenges as we edged towards young adulthood. More than once, he acted as a vital go-between child and parent in times of real rebellion and crisis. What was special was that he had the trust of all parties. It was no small task to get a testy adolescent to share their thoughts, but he did through a combination of honesty, patience, humor, and just enough mischief. Thank you, Brian. Not only did you make life more interesting, you actually tried to make us the best people we could be. So thank you, Melanie. Ooh, all right. My dad would have tears in his eyes and a smile on his face seeing all of you, the people he loved and valued here today, so thank you. Fear not, though. His tears would soon turn to bad jokes, and he would to bad dad jokes, and he would start asking why a porpoise is named a porpoise and not purpose, and why a purpose isn't porpoise, and why doesn't the sun go down in the morning instead of up, or why do we call green green instead of blue? Saying that this was part of Dad in a nutshell would be ironic because he was a total nut. An eccentric, artistic, smiley, emotional, creative, compassionate, and social justice and gadget-loving nut. He majored in geology in college, and this continued to be one of his lifelong passions. So if I had to describe my dad as something other than a nut, I would describe him as an igneous rock. He was not sedimentary rock where the layers fall, ordered layer upon ordered layer and remain, and he was not a metamorphic rock, born from cataclysmic events or cooling liquid hot magma from the Earth's core. He was igneous, an amalgamation of a few different types of rock, all bonded together through chemical bonds, which he would have partially understood, but been wholeheartedly in awe of. Not unlike an igneous rock born from many parts, he was also created by many parts. He was proud to be from Massachusetts and was moved to tears and called me crying the day Massachusetts became the first U.S. state to legalize same-sex marriage. He was also Canadian and performed the first same-sex marriage in Ontario. He believed in humanity, equality, and in the energy and power that comes from being in nature. We went on a lot of long car rides together, and during these rides, we discussed all matters of life, and I would question him on his choices and his beliefs. Sometimes he was more of a friend than a father figure. But at many times on these rides, it was that I found out that despite his chosen profession as a Unitarian minister, he did not believe in the traditional God, but did believe that everyone should have some sense of spirituality. His own belief was that everything has its own energy, whether that be the magnetic pull of a rock, the life-giving flow of water through a tree, or the beating of a heart. He was many things, as we've already discussed. He was also an amateur astronomer, a nature lover, an artist, a hiker, a dog lover, and at all times a loving dad and even more loving grandfather. Make me cry, you guys. Let me talk about you guys. Over the years, Dad would come visit wherever I was, and we would get in the car and explore. He loved a good back road, to drive fast over washboarded out roads. When he came to visit me and help take care of me after I had knee surgery, we would take long car rides out in the country, looking for barns for him to take pictures of and later recreate into 50 or 100 versions of that barn. For many years, he took a month-long sabbatical and would go to the Anza Borrego Desert in Southern California, where he would camp, hike, draw, paint, and commune with the energy of the rocks. One time, while hiking with him there, we found the fossilized spine of a dinosaur. The experience was like a time warp. It was unbelievable to see this beyond old fossilized form, about 10 feet long. Dad was out of his mind with excitement. He was like a kid in a candy store, fossils also being one of his many passions. He was also an adventurer and explorer, as long as it didn't require being up too high. He was deathly afraid of heights, and they turned him into a toddler. One time, I made him go out on a 100-foot high bridge that hung over a waterfall in Quebec City. I did it to torture him, to be honest, because that was part of our relationship. I torture him in the hopes of challenging him, pushing his boundaries, while he uncomfortably abides to shut me up. He walked out onto this bridge one step at a time with so much anxiety and fear on his face, but he did it, and he always did it. He would also visit my husband and I many times when we lived in Washington State, where we would go backpacking together. During these trips, he would hug cliffside walls and chant little mantras as he navigated the narrow trails, but once again, he would always do it. He would always go. I'd like to say something like going backpacking or traveling with Dad was an experience, but I just think that Dad was an experience. Anytime he visited, he would arrive with 2 bags and a carry-on. One suitcase would be filled with carefully wrapped paintbrushes, drawing pens, pads of paper, wick-away golf shirts, cotton sleeve, long-sleeve button-down cotton shirts, khaki pants, and always his latest favorite gadget, which he would have pulled out immediately and showed us. The other bag, his backpacking pack, would be about 800 pounds and would always need serious review prior to actually going backpacking. The first time we caught on to how heavy his backpack was when we were at a trailhead, ready to go, putting our packs on. My husband picked up Dad's pack and nearly threw out his own back. He was like, "Brian, what do you have in here?" And Dad was, his eyes are all lit up, and he's like, "Oh, all kinds of wonderful stuff." And it's true, there's all kinds of wonderful stuff in there. He was a gadget man, after all. So the next thing you know, we had all the contents out on the ground in the car, and as some of the contents of the pack for a 2-night hike were as follows: a GPS, a full set of camping dining ware for 3 people, how thoughtful, 3 tin mugs for hot cocoa and coffee, a half pound of ground Egyptian coffee. He was also a coffee man, and we kept the coffee. 2 books, because he was an avid reader, extra rechargeable camera batteries, 4 flashlights, 2 for him, 2 extras for me and Ben, again, being thoughtful, his own tent, apples, oranges, and 2 extra dinners, a small jar of peanut butter, a gas station quantity of candy bars, an extra stove, and about clothes for a week, and always Dial soap, the only kind of soap he would use. So after much sorting and bargaining, we kept the soap, the coffee, and all the candy bars, and in the future, the bags were lighter. While hiking, he would marvel at the smallest lichens, frequently making stops to really zero in the lens of his latest and strongest phone camera onto the details of a bug or piece of moss or whatever. And despite having taken out the 300 pounds of hardware and multi-seasonal wardrobe from his pack, his frequent stops to take pictures or marvel and breathe in the surrounding nature always meant his hiking pace was as slow as molasses. Fortunately, the pain of waiting around for him to catch up was always balanced out with the candy bars. He would always catch up and offer a half-eaten bag of M&Ms from his pocket or bite a Snickers, thus also lightening the mood and reminding us to stop and smell the lichen while eating chocolate. He lived in the moment, that I am sure of. Dad had a great mind, an innocent wonder for the world, and a love for everything in it. The thing I do already miss and will miss most about my dad is seeing him arrive in the driveway at my house. I kind of want this one more time. After a long drive from Ottawa to Maine, he would park in the driveway, slowly unfold his arthritic knees out of the car, maybe groaning a little bit as he did so, then drop his passport, then drop his wallet on the ground, as he stood up, temporarily losing them, and then as I walk up the driveway to him, he would give up the search for the passport and his wallet, and a huge smile would spread across his face, and he would walk toward me with open arms. And I would hug my dad, and it wasn't all "this is my dad" hug. He was warm, big enough to engulf me, and smelled like my dad, always the same smell. I miss those hugs and that smile. And this is the memory of my dad that I will always keep warm. Thank you for being here today, and I hope you all have some memories of Dad to also keep warm.
Thank you all who have spoken. And before we hear once more from Elizabeth and Sam, I'd just like to say a very brief word to the youngest people who are here with us today, and that's Eleanor and Eamonn. I don't know if you remember your grandfather when he lived as large as he clearly lived. You get to ask questions about who he was. I see a little tear on a face. That's just fine. We want both of you to live as large as your grandpa did. And we can't wait to hear what stories you have to tell. We're with you. We're with you. And now, let's be blessed by music. Elizabeth, Sam, please, grace us once again. Thank you again. Brian's death has created a void in our lives that can only be filled by remembering the love and memories he left behind. The truth is that love never ends. Our dead live on through us and in us, in the ways they have shaped us and in our memories of them. Trust that the best of who Brian was will live on in you. And for all of us who know sadness at this time, these words: there is, finally, only one thing required of us. That is to take life whole, the bright and dark together, to live the life that is given us with courage, with humor, with truth. We have such a short moment out of the vastness of time for all our wondering, wandering, and loving. Therefore, let there be no half-heartedness. Rather, let our souls be ardent in facing grief, in yearning, and in offering praise. Then may peace enfold our days, and grace shall not fade from our lives. And now, as we have come together to remember and to give thanks for Brian's life, it is time together to say goodbye. Brian, farewell. Humbly we stand in the face of death. Confidently we stand with life. Our strength is the strength of many. Indeed, it is the strength of all humanity throughout time, because we share one fate and a great compassion. May understanding go with us, and peace too, that we may live together with generosity, compassion, and joy. In this spirit, individually and together, may we go forth to live with love renewed. Go in peace, my friends. Go in peace.